Talk to a lot of leaders and organizations, and obviously changing a individual's behavior is relatively easier than trying to change like a large enterprise. When you think of leaders, how do they operate in this environment? I think of this analogy, you've sparked analogies in me because I think it's a nice way to convey things. But when you're sitting on an airplane and they say, secure your mask before you help others, do you find from a leadership standpoint, it's really important to understand some of the fundamentals and wrap your head around this before you can walk into organizations? Is it imperative for leaders to really understand the opportunity and how it works, or should they offload this responsibility to people and teams within their organizations?
That's a really interesting way to ask the question because I think you're answering it in a way with the question, which makes my life a little bit easier because it's both in a way. And I don't mean to say it's both. You got to do both. I don't mean that, but there's two things. So sometimes I will hear, listen, this isn't just the role of leadership, like because it's so, and I don't like the word democratized, but I don't know how else to say it. Since everybody has equal access to this tool in a certain sense, the ideas can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to be like the cascading of knowledge from the top down to the bottom, as usually happens with corporations. Like the new person comes in and learns from the person above that, et cetera, et cetera. So in this sense, anybody can be good at it. And so your ideas should come from anywhere. So that's the argument against leadership really has to lead this process. And that is true. There's also a huge problem with that. And it goes to how you started off the question, which is like putting your oxygen mask on first. Like, how should leaders structure change in an individual is way easier than change in an organization. Let me tell you what I've done in the past that went wrong that made me realize the punchline of leaders have to understand this first, not before everybody else, but if they don't understand it, things go radically off the rails. So what happened was I would get called into a big healthcare organization or something, and they would say, hey, can you teach our digital marketing team of 200 people or whatever it is how to use this? And so I was like, sure. So I would do that, but something problematic would happen. The thing that went right was that it got everybody really excited because the way I teach is getting people not just enthusiastic, excited about it, but also giving them a framework to think differently, all that kind of stuff. So they would do that and it would accomplish the mission, which was it got everybody who was listening and excited leveled up. And that was great. So in a way, I walked away being like, that was awesome. I did my job, all that kind of stuff. But the thing that went wrong was that because we didn't really have leadership in the room, those, let's call it 200 people, all really radically changed how they went about their day. But what does that mean? Well, it means either they were able to do a lot more work, just one person, because generative AI allows you to really expand what you're able to do in a workday, or it allowed people to turn their 8 hour day into a 6 hour day and essentially produce the same amount of work in 6 hours instead of 8 hours. And then a lot of this world, and I'll just stick with America because that's what I know best, they're not looking to add extra hours or extra work, right? They want to come to work and they want to go home. And that's totally understandable. But what does that mean for the company? This company that actually paid me to come in and do all this, it made their workers very happy or this team very happy. But did it actually hit revenue? I'm like, I don't think so. And why? Because they either turned their 8 hour day into a 6 hour day, or they did a lot more productivity, which ended up really skewing talent evaluation, right? So all of a sudden, this person who wasn't nearly as talented as the marketer who had been there for 15 years and really understood the fundamentals, but they used this tool to look like a superhero. And all of a sudden they were like, oh my gosh, we got to elevate Dan. Dan is incredible at this. Who knew? But what happens is Dan is just using generative AI, whereas they're more seasoned and probably more knowledgeable colleagues were much better at this. Dan was whipping past them. So now I say I won't do an engagement with an organization unless senior leadership is in the room. And ideally, I start with senior leadership. Sometimes I even start with the board, but really senior leadership. And so why is that? It's not because senior leadership has to know it and understand it. It's because of your sort of the oxygen mask analogy. It's because senior leadership, first of all, has to understand when they say, hey, we're all going to get fluent in generative AI. What does that mean? What I mean? Like they have to understand what it looks like in their own workday. They have to understand, oh, it's so expensive that this is what it would look like in HR. This is what it look like in legal. This is what it looks like in operations. This is what it looks like in sales. They have to understand how completely agnostic this technology is in that it can transform everybody across the department. And also all those department heads, essentially like the line managers have to understand like, oh, I'm in HR. This is what it's going to look like in HR. Oh, I'm in sales. This is what it's going to look like. So that's number one. Number two is the talent evaluation problem. It's that unless they understand what this does, talent evaluation is going to get totally screwed up. Like they're not going to understand, oh, this is what this looks like for individuals on this thing. And I think the third thing is really that they're not setting new benchmarks for their teams. They have to say, oh, now that I know what this can do, our new expectation for somebody on our sales team is not, it used to be able to reach out to 20 people a day. Now it's being able to reach out to 40 people a day and cut down on this task. Or in the research department now, instead of spending 4 hours a day researching and another 4 hours a day, I work with legal a lot, so that's big on this one. Now it's an hour and a half of researching a day and then processing that. Anyway, I say all that to say that if you're not setting benchmarks at the leadership level, you're really screwing yourself because you won't understand what your organization is actually doing.